It's the most bold-faced iteration of what ethnic cleansing operation looks like. They're going back in to move everybody from the north to the south, put them in humanitarian quote-unquote safe zones, which are basically ghettos.
Welcome back to The Tea. I'm your host, Myriam Francois. Before we get into this episode, I just want to take a tiny moment to ask you to do one thing for me, and that is to hit that subscribe button now. We're a small independent team, no big networks here, no corporate backing, just a handful of people who care deeply about having honest conversations and shining a light on what often goes unseen or unheard. So if our work does resonate with you too, then subscribe now on YouTube and join us on Patreon, link in our bio. Today, as Gaza starves and the world looks on, is the tide finally turning? Israeli leaders have dropped all pretense. Former Knesset member Moshe Feiglin recently declared, "Every child, every baby in Gaza is an enemy. We need to conquer Gaza and colonize it and not leave a single Gazan child there." Prime Minister Netanyahu now openly promises to take control of the entire Gaza Strip, while senior ministers openly speak of cleansing and forced population transfers. The rhetoric is as clear as it gets. This was never about Hamas. The objective is the erasure and occupation of Gaza itself. In response, the UK, France, and Canada have issued a rare joint condemnation, threatening sanctions and calling the crisis intolerable. The EU is reviewing trade ties, and Britain's Foreign Secretary has called Israel's actions monstrous, suspending free trade talks and summoning the Israeli ambassador. Yet the assault grinds on, with hundreds more killed as the US signs trillion-dollar arms deals in the Gulf. Words mount, but not as fast as the casualties. To unpack this moment and the global machinery enabling it, I'm joined by Greg Stoker, US military veteran, former special ops, and host of the Colonial Outcast podcast. Greg's viral insights expose how the war machine operates abroad and at home. So, Gaza, US foreign policy, and the real agenda behind shifting alliances. Is this a turning point or just cover for a relentless project of expansion? Greg, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Always a pleasure. Last time I saw you, you were on my show, the stream on Al Jazeera.
Yeah, that was one of my first TV appearances.
But certainly not your last since then. You've been all over the place. Your face pops up regularly all over my social media. You have made this transition from US Army Special Operations to outspoken anti-imperialist. You've become in many ways an icon of that movement. Tell us a bit about your background in the military. What was your expertise and what made you shift perspective?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, I joined the Army right outside of high school, just like a lot of people who join the military, nowhere else to go. And I felt like very disempowered, needed to prove something to myself. So I decided to sign a contract for a special operations unit within the U.S. military. I signed up for the U.S. Army Rangers. It's more of like a land-based special operations unit. And, passed selection. And did 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan, started off as a primary assault team leader, and then started to branch more into human intelligence collection. Started with field interrogations and, then more analysis stuff. And over the course of that, I hate to say I got radicalized, because being like, hey, we shouldn't be drone striking people we don't have actionable intelligence on. Apparently that's radical. So, and that was under Obama's drone campaign. Around 2012, 2013, I started to kind of realize when I got plugged into the kinetic strike targeting cycle, which is like basically, without getting into jargon, you collect intelligence information on these people. You try to vet it through multi-source reporting, which is like cell phone traffic, voice identification, sources on the ground, image intelligence, and try to determine, okay, this is the high value target that we're going after. If you can't, shoot him with a Hellfire missile, then you'll have to send in a special operations team to go get him. And then I just realized after I got a top secret security clearance that, we didn't really have, there weren't really any targets, but
Wow.
We still had to, there were, but they were like low level guys, most of the Taliban leadership and the Haqqani leadership, and they were in northern Pakistan. And we're mostly going after like foreign fighters and guys who just really may have shown up on the wrong contact list in someone's cell phone. So we were capturing or detaining people that really had nothing to do with anything.
Capturing, detaining, and torturing.
Yeah, I wasn't really part of that whole process, but the U.S. has a long history of outsourcing torture as well to local forces, so like Afghan intelligence and stuff like that, so we don't have to do it ourselves. And then the whole drone strike thing was a complete mess. I was in a tactical operations center when they hit that Yemeni wedding.
Yes.
And that was absolutely absurd because none of the quote unquote Al Qaeda guys that they were trying to target were hit. It was just all civilians. And that was authorized by Obama. And after that, I still had some problematic ideas. My childhood goal was to do a 5-year contract in a special operations unit, get some field experience, then go to an Ivy League school, and then go to work for the CIA. So after I got out, I went to Columbia University. And then I double
that radical center.
Yeah, that center, that hotbed of terrorism,
right.
radicalization.
The Hamas hotbed.
Yeah, and then I started majoring in international relations and anthropology, and through anthropology, I started getting exposed to like post-colonial studies. Like one of the formative texts was, of course, it's part of the canon, Orientalism by Edward Said.
Of course.
And I was like, this makes almost too much sense. And then I started really, it was a combination of like experiential questioning of what we were doing combined with more like formal education and theory about why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Imperialism, capitalism, etc. That's when I started to get, again, radicalized and being like, hey, can we just stop doing this? I became an anti-war activist, but I wasn't a public figure. I didn't go public with it until like October 10th, watching JDAM's Joint Direct Attack Munitions dropped on one of the most highly populated centers on Earth, and watching Air
Gaza.
Force colonels on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, who knew damn well that even as bad as we weren't doing that in Baghdad or Kabul or any of these theaters. Just straight up lie. Like, yes, we did that. Well, no, we did. We were guilty of plenty of war crimes, but we didn't do that, and that kind of just bothered me. And of course, seeing the live stream genocide also like really activated a lot of, I guess you would call PTSD stuff.
Yeah.
I did like therapy for like 8 years continually after I got out of the military, after my combat deployments, and I thought it was like good. But I wasn't. So I either had to come to a place where it's like, either I'm going to be really dysfunctional about this and just like drink all the time, or I'm going to be outspoken about it.
Your activism is also connected to your way of dealing with the trauma of your experience in the US military then.
Yeah. Also, I don't think like as a human with a soul, I'd feel right just being like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to brunch and pretend like this isn't happening.
It's what most of us are doing out here, Greg.
I know.
We're all out here brunching through the genocide.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a bit about the reaction that you've had from your colleagues, because you've mentioned a couple of things just casually out here, that you had, top security clearance, that you were obviously involved in obviously quite high level operations, that you had goals of sort of joining the CIA. You have the type of knowledge of military operations that is, let's be frank, quite dangerous for governments to have somebody speak openly about. Let me ask you a little about how people in your circles or your former circles have responded to you going rogue, as it were, to you exposing the underbelly of the beast.
Yeah, I had a top secret security clearance for like human intelligence stuff. It was pretty standard for a special operations unit, but you would be absolutely shocked by what's not classified. I also speak in general terms because one of my goals is to educate civilians on how this works, because it's important for your like knowledge of politics and how these things work.
But I guess what I was getting at was, how do your former colleagues within the military feel about you, in many ways highlighting the more nefarious aspects of what is otherwise presented as, the what do you call them in America? The great and the brave, the true patriots. That's how the military
yes.
is typically represented, and what you do undermines that representation.
Within the veteran community, it's kind of polarizing. There are guys who can't reconcile what they did or what happened, or the fact that they sacrificed their youth and buried their friends for a pack of imperialist lies. And those people generally double down on the whole like patriotism, love it or leave it stuff. They accuse me of stolen valor, which is where you say you did something in military and you lied about it, like medals, deployments, schools you went to within the service. And it's kind of a risky accusation to make, because when you leave the U.S. military, you get a piece of paper called a DD-214 that even has your social security number, like your home address. It has the unit you were in, all your places that you were stationed, medals, schools, deployments. So it's kind of easy to disprove, but of course...
You've published all of that information. You've rendered that public.
In November, about a month after going public with this, I started getting like blasted with stolen valor accusations. So yes, I put it all online. Yeah. As well as like photographic evidence and stuff. So those people will like be like, you're a traitor to your uniform. You're now like a radical. I've heard like you went to Columbia University and now, you got radicalized into, jihadism.
Wow.
Yeah.
Only that.
Yeah. Only that, so that's fine. But most of my friends and the guys I served with that I'm still in contact with, and also a lot of veterans from across the country, they might not be activists, but they at least agree that, what we call the GWAT, the global war on terror, the 20-year misadventure throughout North Africa and the Middle East and other places that we don't talk about, like the Philippines, and of course Central Africa, is they know it was a waste of time. And they have a massive problem with the military-industrial complex. So, yes, they might not necessarily or know what to think about the whole Israel-Palestine thing, but they think that at the very least, U.S. interventionism has proven to be bad.
Right. We'll come back to that notion in a bit. But earlier on in our conversation, you mentioned the fact that some of your colleagues were popping up on screen, sort of almost justifying what Israel was doing in Gaza, where we know that there are now 6,000-pound bombs being dropped on people, more bombs, I believe, in terms of the weight than was dropped in Hiroshima.
Yeah, the tonnage and the net explosive weight has exceeded 2 nuclear bombs, probably 3 at this time, but we've lost track.
Right. And so for years we were told that there are rules in war. And of course, as a former member of the military, I'm sure this is part of the training that you undergo. There are rules of war. There are basic protection that are supposed to shield civilians, at least officially, from the worst aspects of conflict. These are codified in the 4th Geneva Convention. They protect hospitals. They protect medical workers. And in all conflicts, both parties are, supposed to abide by this codification of international law to protect civilians. But since the ongoing genocide in Gaza, these rules have been repeatedly violated and ignored. And yet, for some reason, we don't seem to see the sort of uproar when Israel violates these norms that we would were it, I think, any other country. So why is Israel getting away with these persistent violations, and why are so many countries providing cover for it?
Do you remember in 2015 in Afghanistan, it was in the Kunduz province, when Obama authorized that strike on the Doctors Without Borders hospital? It was all over international news back in 2015. It was a massive international scandal. U.S. forces had actually dropped a hospital. And of course, Doctors Without Borders had informed the U.S. military that they were there and operating in that area. And it was a huge scandal. Cover-up happened, zero accountability. But after that, we changed our targeting parameters, so that didn't happen again because it was hugely embarrassing. We didn't want to be seen in that certain way. And when it comes to like the law of land warfare and these international laws, I generally talk about it like this, if I'm coming at it from a military perspective. So we were actually, and without apologizing for U.S. interventionism, we were actually trying to fight a counterinsurgency. In Iraq against certain groups and factions, in Afghanistan against Taliban, the Khani, proto-Islamic Islamic State, which is ISIS-K, ISIS in the Khorasan, and other people. So that looks fundamentally different from what Israel is doing. I knew within like a couple days that they weren't even going to try to attempt that. And of course, I had been aware that they have had this multi-generational effort of genocide and ethnic cleansing, but I didn't think they'd be this brazen about it. So there is an acronym in U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine. It's kind of demonstrative of how we knew from a military perspective early on that they weren't fighting counterinsurgency. It's called SWET MSO. It stands for sewage, water, electricity, academics, trash, medical, safety, and other. And the basic premise is if you're an occupying force in someone else's country or land, and all of those sectors aren't kept up to code, if they're degraded in any ways under military occupation, people are going to want to kill you.
I mean,
yeah, crazy thought, right? So basically in Iraq, I was too young to have gone to Iraq, but it's sending contractors to like rebuild the school systems, fix plumbing, electricity, water. And
you mean that all of these outreach efforts were not the benevolent act of the U.S. government?
Yeah, no, we did. Yeah, they weren't.
They were not.
It might be shocking to some. Well, we were there to spread democracy.
Spread democracy and human rights and love for freedom, I thought.
And also wash taxpayer money out of the public sector into the private sector with all these defense contractors. So that was just an added benefit to the nation building exercise. So basically, if you go through the list of the acronyms that I've just given, they've systematically, they were all the first thing that they've targeted. There's a complete, like even if we look at academics, they've completely committed a scholasticide within Gaza. I don't think there's a single school, with the exception of like a couple elementary schools that they just haven't gotten around to bombing yet, that are gone. University's gone. Medical, okay. Well, right now under their new operation, Gideon's Chariots, which I assume we're going to talk about later.
Oh, we will.
They're targeting electrical generators so that hospitals have no more power going forward. So they're literally contravening everything that we developed during the global war on terror for counterinsurgency doctrine. And that's one of the first points I made when looking at these CNN pundits in like October 2023, November 2023, talking about it, because they came from the same background that I did, exposed to the same fundamental counterinsurgency doctrine, and they're just lying. And of course, they work for think tanks like the Atlantic Council that are bankrolled by like Boeing and Raytheon and stuff like that. So they have a vested interest. And of course, CNN and outlets like that have always been like a cutout for U.S. Intelligence propaganda as well. So it's all part of what we call not the MIC, the military industrial complex, but the MIMAC, the military industrial academic media complex, which all feeds into the one same thing. So I think the military industrial complex is kind of like a reductive term because you need academics, think tanks, which advise policy, and the media to push it out to the people. And that all is part of the same system. So that's how generals can go from aboard of Raytheon to coming on to CNN to talk about how it's okay for Israel to bomb Gaza.
Because they've developed so much expertise on that board to be able to comment on military tactics.
Yeah, so in a roundabout way, what kind of motivated me to do that?
So interestingly, you mentioned there the notion of an insurgency, and what we hear typically in the news when there's a discussion about what's happening in Gaza is the use of the word war. Now, obviously, as you correctly pointed out, Israel is an occupying power. They have, one of the most well-funded and well-equipped militaries in the world. The Palestinians have resistance groups on the ground. Is this a war? Is that a term that you feel can accurately describe what is going on in Gaza? And if not, why not? And I'm speaking purely from an accuracy perspective. Can this be described as a war?
Well, it's certainly not a conventional war between two powers that have both, air forces and artillery corps and tank divisions and infantry divisions and stuff like that. I don't consider it to be a war. I consider it to be a genocide because it also exists in the West Bank where there aren't really any substantive resistance groups. It's one of the most heavily surveilled places on Earth, the West Bank. It's almost impossible to get weapons in there. And everyone's still being like cleansed and displaced and ghettoized within, humanitarian safe zones. And, it's not a war because they're not primarily targeting members of Hamas. They don't have the targeting data. Even if they wanted to collapse the tunnels, those 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs cannot penetrate 50 meters of earth, which, a lot of those tunnel systems exist under. They're meant to bust bunkers, which means they directly go into the concrete exposed on the surface of a bunker and penetrate inside and then explode. So they can't collapse the tunnels because they're not built to do that. So what they're doing is they're dropping tenement buildings, they're dropping schools, civilian infrastructure. So it's not really a war because they're not targeting combatants.
And I mean, at this point, they are literally starving people and have been for over 11 weeks. We've seen no aid enter whatsoever. I want to take you back to February 25th, 2024, where outside the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., where veteran Aaron Bushnell self-immolated in protest over events in Gaza. And these were his words at the time. He said, "Many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it right now." Greg, 15 months after Aaron made that statement and that immense sacrifice, things have only gotten worse. So what exactly should we all be doing?
Well, it's interesting. We were both at that the protest here in London a few days ago, or last weekend, I suppose it was. 500,000 people showed up, which was, we think that it was that many. It was certainly a lot. And I would just like to say, that's good, of course. It's people are going to keep coming on board with the movement as this goes on and on and on. As a veteran, as an anti-war veteran, I take a lot of inspiration and cues from the Vietnam backlash. U.S.'s engagement in Vietnam, at least militarily, from 1965 to 1975. 10 years of kind of the most radical intersectional opposition to government policy that we've ever seen. Labor unions were shutting down factories, longshoremen unions were shutting down ports. There were mutinies aboard merchant marine ships taking weapons to Vietnam. There's intersection between the anti-war veteran movement called VAW, Veterans Against the War, and the Black Panthers and the Civil Rights Movement and labor unions, and there's environmentalists. That really doesn't exist anymore, right? Because after the Vietnam War, at least in the United States, the powers that be went on a systematic campaign to break union power, to intensify their propaganda against socialist reform or progressive reform, and the CIA and FBI tried to paint the entire thing as a bunch of long-haired hippies that didn't want to fight and draft dodgers and stuff like that. But even with all of that united power, it still took 10 years to end. I'm not really surprised that this is going to keep going on and on. So the reason I bring up the 500,000 person protest, again, it's good because people are going to keep coming on board. Because even in year 9 of the Vietnam War, people are like, okay, maybe this is wrong. I'm going to get involved. And those are the point of protest. But beyond that, and it shows solidarity, it makes people feel less alone and isolated in this insane world. But beyond that, they don't really accomplish much. They give cops overtime, and that's about it. And of course, they choose the routes so they're not as intrusive or offensive, and everyday citizens don't have to see it. So what's more effective, 500,000 people or 50 people picketing and shutting down an airfield or a weapons plant and stuff? And if this is going to be effective, direct action is the way to go. It really is. And transnational stuff is so the weapons plant in Ohio should be picketed or shut down, as well as the airstrip in Ireland where they get sent to overseas to Cyprus. So yeah,
And of course, just to clarify, we are not endorsing any of those actions. We are just reflecting your views on the most effective.
it's an academic exercise,
Right.
based off of historical precedent.
Oh yeah, exactly. Greg, I want to also ask you about this campaign online right now called the Global March to Gaza. It's a civilian-led movement with no political or religious ties. The idea is to gather thousands of people from around the world to peacefully march to the Rafah crossing on June the 15th, calling for an end to the genocide and for aid to be let in to Gaza. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think marches like this one could make a difference?
I wouldn't be surprised if the Egyptian authorities get involved and
I'm afraid
suppress
this
it.
was my thoughts exactly.
Yeah.
Tell us, Greg.
There is a massive push for normalization within the Arab states for Israel, and that's coming from the U.S., the U.K. Egypt has its own financial issues. You know, it's heavily indebted to the IMF. It's basically controlled by the West. Sisi is a very problematic figure. Since the genocide began, imports to Israel have increased, not decreased. There's basically no evidence that we have whatsoever that the Egyptian government would not get involved and try to suppress it, because it's a form of dissent.
Right.
Governments don't, at the most basic level, they don't like that, and especially in a place like the Sinai Peninsula where they're fighting a low grade, cold insurgency against certain Bedouin militias there. They don't want anything.
The Egyptian authorities are not known for being particularly conciliatory towards protest movements in Egypt more broadly.
I've read that somewhere.
So I hear.
Yeah.
It's worth noting for people who are considering this that there are people, including British nationals, languishing in Egyptian jails, and the British government has been unable to get them out. And it's also probably worth noting that the last elected president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, was tortured to death in an Egyptian prison, and that was all fine, apparently. So not considered particularly problematic. So just highlighting maybe for those considering this, part of me wonders how useful it would be to see some of the leading figures of the Palestine movement end up in Egyptian prisons.
Yeah, and even if the Egyptian government doesn't stop it, which they will, then you have to contend with what the Israeli government will do to suppress that. We just saw off the coast of Malta, the Freedom Flotilla. Can't say definitively what happened, but a loitering drone munition dropped a couple of high explosive dual penetration devices on a boat in the Freedom Flotilla, destined to trying to take aid into Gaza. Conspicuously, a Israeli transport aircraft turned its transponder off in the central Mediterranean a few hours before the drones hit, and kind of seems like maybe, no way to confirm it, that they dropped a couple of loitering drones and waited for that to happen. So there is historical precedent for Israel also stopping these things. Back in 2010, there was also a massacre aboard the Freedom Flotilla as well. So there's just a lot of roadblocks to that. I think people's resources and time could be better spent within the imperial core. If they want to disrupt something, they could do it there.
Let's move on to one of the recent operations that Israel has just announced, its new ground offensive in Gaza, Operation Gideon's Chariots. The plan significantly intensifies the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where more than 1 million children are currently at risk of starvation, according to UNICEF. So what is Operation Gideon's Chariots, for those who are not familiar with what it is actually going on, and why is Israel launching this? Why now?
Well, it's now it's the most bold-faced iteration of what an ethnic cleansing operation looks like. They're going back in to move everybody from the north to the south, put them in humanitarian quote-unquote safe zones, which are basically ghettos that you will not necessarily have freedom of movement in between. They're reinforcing different axes and corridors throughout Gaza to not bifurcate it, but changed it into 3 separate segments that you cannot cross. So you have the north, then you have the Netzarim corridor along the Wadi Gaza, and now you have the Morag corridor as well. It's all meant to limit freedom of movement, parcel everybody up, and divide the population from itself. Decentralize it while they move in. And we can talk about, some of the absurd plans like move people to South Sudan and to Libya, as if Libya, a war-torn country, will accept 1 million refugees. But anyways, right now...
doesn't already have a refugee crisis on its hands.
So anyways, we can talk about the specifics later, but I will always like to bring up Israeli operational naming conventions. So what their operation going on in the West Bank is called Operation Iron Wall, which is basically like, okay, we're going to create more walls and do more apartheid. It's like with the U.S. military, we try to give ourselves like innocuous names that people can't interpret what the actual intention behind the operation is, but they just go straight for it. So
the Israelis are just on the nose about it.
It's just really on the nose. And Gideon's cheer at the naming convention is like the most salient encapsulation of what Zionism is. It's like misremembered history, zero self-awareness, and like idolatry all combined into one. Because first of all, Gideon didn't have chariots. He basically fought like an underdog struggle against a vastly superior military force. And so, they had like, I forget the numbers, it was like 300 to 1,000. They were vastly outnumbered. They had no chariots. And they're kind of reimagining this as they were the underdog, but whereas Hamas or whatever resistance factions have like 25,000 guys, 40,000 guys within Gaza, they have hundreds of thousands of reservists. So it's a complete reversal of the history itself. Also, no chariots. Also, chariots are a symbol of imperial power. So just sub out chariots for tanks, and you've got it. But the operation itself is, yes, they're rolling in divisions, tank divisions, to basically move everybody out. And I don't think
everyone out, meaning you believe that this is part of a population transfer, into the Sinai?
They're going to, well, I don't see how they would accomplish that politically. Jordan can't take them. Egypt can't take them.
Well, can Egypt object to anything? Egypt is essentially completely beholden to the U.S. government. It's, as you mentioned, completely in debt. Sisi relies. Egypt is the second biggest recipient of U.S. aid after Israel. To what extent can Egypt actually decline U.S. pressure were it to come via Israel for this evacuation, aka ethnic cleansing?
Well, the U.S. has its own, and the Western powers have its own vested interest in not having Egypt go into a complete tailspin. Having a bunch of a massive, potentially insurgency in the Sinai, destabilization in the Sinai Peninsula, could affect and impact the Suez Canal as well. So there are other complicating factors as well.
And the Suez Canal, for people who are not familiar, being one of the main trade routes in the world, which is why control over it is so crucial to Western powers, and wars, in fact, have historically been forced over.
Yeah, didn't you guys send airborne divisions to seize the Suez Canal in the 50s? So we definitely don't want to that to go out of control. But that's just one factor as well. Basically, what we're looking at is an attempt, and they don't know how it's going to pan out necessarily, or how they're going to accomplish it, to cleanse and privatize the Gaza Strip.
Cleanse is very nice. I mean, it's what I do in the morning when I just cleanse my skin from impurities. I just want to check what we mean here. Cleanse Gaza of Palestinians, meaning eradicate. I mean, because obviously
not just their personhood, but any vestige of their existence that they'd ever been there. So, which includes destroying all the schools, all libraries, bulldozing graveyards, leveling the whole place. For me, I don't know, cleanse is a very dark word, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, just, and so let's talk about the Morag corridor for a minute, because for people who are not familiar with the geography of Gaza, there's the Philadelphia corridor in the south near the Rafah crossing. And then we have 2 new corridors that have emerged over the last 19 to 20 months, of which the Morag corridor is one. What is the purpose of this and other corridors within Gaza exactly? And are these new permanent features, or are they, as has previously been suggested when the Israelis have on very rare occasion been pressed on this issue, been described as temporary?
I don't think they're going to be temporary, or at least they're going to not be temporary until they have to withdraw sometime in the future. What they are is cordons. So the Israeli Defense Force isn't really holding ground, right? They go into a place like Khan Yunis or these towns with smaller population centers within Gaza, do a couple raids, do a show of force, pretend like they're actually doing something on the ground, whereas they're mostly just dropping bombs. And they go back to these security corridors where they stage out of. And so it's a way to separate the population from itself, but also it's an access that they can control without risk having a significant risk to their forces as well, because they're a pretty disorganized military. So they kind of like to stay concentrated along certain pathways or avenues as well.
So what do you mean by disorganized? Because I think obviously not only do they regularly get touted as the most moral army in the world, but certainly they are represented as, allegedly one of the most efficient.
Yes, the lion of the Middle East. After 2 years of military experience, which is what most of these people have, you're still a conscript. Like, I didn't make sergeant until I'd been in for 3 years at least, but now they have like 21-year-old officers leading entire platoons. That's insane. They're too young, both in terms of experience and emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence or capacity. And, we see that their ground tactics are horrible. But basically what they've created is Stalingrad. So
by which you mean?
The absolute target devastation, what they called obliterated terrain warfare. So they've destroyed all these buildings, created all this rubble, and they have basically taken away their one advantage, one of their biggest advantages, which is tanks, which is armored personnel carriers. Because they can drive over most terrain except rubble, because they'll start throwing tracks, like tank tracks and treads, and then they won't be able to run anymore. So what they have to do, what they've done, is they have to bring in bulldozers to clear avenues of approach so they can send their patrols in. But those are really predictable, obviously. So what the resistance fighters are doing is they're emplacing IEDs along very discernible canalizing terrain features. So they're just getting hit with IEDs, and it's just one of the worst strategic moves I've ever seen. And they should have known not to do that, because everybody in War College studies Stalingrad as one of the biggest military blunders in World War II, about what the Germans did.
Do we have any sense of how severe the hits they're taking are? Because a lot of this is redacted, isn't it, Greg?
Well, there's a gag order, yeah, on casualties, deaths, both on the battlefield and in suicides and hospitals and stuff like that. We have, public statements from different groups with different Palestinian groups within Gaza. I mean, I always take those with a grain of salt because they're waging their own information operations campaign.
Of course.
But yeah, no, we're seeing casualty evacuation helicopters land regularly at Israeli hospitals in the Gaza envelope. This is done through open source. So there's definitely fighting going on. It's not the same kind of urban warfare, like gunfights that were happening during the early stages of the invasion. It's mostly just booby traps and IED emplacements and stuff like that. But yeah, it's basically a low grade fighting that's going on right now, but it's definitely happening.
Now, we've also in recent days seen the arrival of American mercenaries in Gaza, allegedly to deliver aid, as Israel is denying access to UNRWA and other aid agencies who have typically provided for the needs of the population. Now, there's been some speculation online that these forces, which come under the title of the Gaza Humanitarian Organization, which is an Israeli-approved kind of conglomerate made up primarily of these private contractors who have no precedence of delivering aid in Gaza. There's some speculation online that they're not actually there to deliver the aid. And I want to ask you about this because there's also been some suggestion online that some of them may have been involved recently in an attempted hostage retrieval using some of these men. Are they there to provide for the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian population of Gaza, Greg? Or are they there to help expel them? I mean, why are there American mercenaries in Gaza right now? The Tea is a fully independent, non-partisan production. No corporate ties here, just a small, dedicated team working hard to bring you honest, impactful conversations. If you believe in our work, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just click on that subscribe button now and join us as a Patreon. You'll find the link in our bio.
Well, I mean, I assume that the humanitarian question was rhetorical. It's a definitive no. So let's back up and talk about the world of PMCs, private military contractors. All right, so just a little background. When I was getting out of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, like I got approached by Academy, which was rebranded from Z, which was rebranded from Blackwater. Everybody who like comes out of a certain community gets approached, tries to get recruited for these companies. That's pretty standard. They pay very well, generally, especially in the conflict zones.
They pay well to do what, Greg?
Well, it depends on what the job is. It can be as innocuous from protecting rhinos from hunters in Africa to doing like wet work. So
doing what, sorry?
Wet work, just like killing people. So
killing people.
Yes.
So private contractors.
Yeah, it's a whole spectrum, and these guys are not on the good side of the spectrum. So they're probably making, based off of, you know, what the price point has been, like $300,000 a year to do this kind of stuff, probably maybe more. So basically, what is happening is they're running a series. What it looks like is happening, they're running a series of pilot programs. So a few months ago in January, it broke. I think Reuters broke it. I'm not entirely sure which outlet did that. About 40 U.S. mercenaries, PMCs, private military contractors, were going to secure a couple checkpoints in the Netzarim corridor. Just a couple checkpoints, you know, run security operations. And this is nothing new. A lot of base security in Iraq and Afghanistan was actually privatized by veterans. You know, so soldiers and Marines didn't have to do it. It was also, I guess, a cheeky way of washing taxpayer money out of the private sector into defense contractors, because a lot of people, including politicians, were making money off of that. But anyways, private military contractors are used throughout the world as a kind of a state mechanism to do things that we don't directly want to be seen doing. And it's not just us who does it. Like Russia's Wagner Group is a private military that, you know, trains different governmental forces and other militant groups throughout Africa. You know, but we definitely have the biggest network and we do it the most, and we're probably the worst. So the thing that's interesting about these security checkpoints, it was only a couple of them. Why would you send PMCs to only run, out of all of the security checkpoints, just 2 of them? I was talking to a lot of people about this who were from the same community I was in. It looks like a pilot program to see if they could put U.S. private contractors on the ground and see if they get shot or see if they get attacked and see if they could do it. Because all of this is, they want to privatize every aspect of the Gaza Strip.
And so let's talk about why they want to privatize it. And I think you've kind of hinted at this a second ago, which is that some of these big companies like Blackwater and others basically make a lot of money by doing the dirty work of the American government. I mean, in 2016, 1 in 4 veterans and soldiers in Iraq were actually through private contractors. So this is a very common practice that's been going on for a very long time. You mentioned it being a way of sort of funneling money. So can you run that by us? Because I've often referred to Israel as the biggest money laundering operation in the world, right? US taxpayer money gets sent to Israel in the form of aid because, of course, you know, people in Israel are starving and living under the poverty line. No, they're not. And then that money gets paid into US defense contractors, which many
who lobby politicians and, you know, give it to their campaign and also give them, you know, fun little this is just supposition, but, you know, insider trading tips as well.
Certainly not, Greg. Just speculation, I'm sure. So what is the role of these sort of defense contractors and these private defense contractors in the wider picture of what we're seeing? Because what I'm hearing is obviously an economic incentive for wars to endure.
Right, absolutely. And I just want to point out, now that we already talked about the pilot program, to see if, like, U.S. forces will get attacked. Now we're kind of expanding it into humanitarian aid work. I think the current contractor that's sending like, I don't know, a couple dozen guys to try out this whole aid management thing in the coming months is called the Gaza Health Foundation.
The Gaza Humanitarian Organization.
Okay. So founded by an ex-Marine sniper employing all generally combat veterans. And I'll tell you what, as a combat veteran, zero humanitarian experience. None.
So why is America sending these guys to allegedly deliver aid? Is this just a front?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to basically collect intelligence. Like,
to what end?
To what end? Well, to support the Israeli effort in whatever way they can. So basically, while they're distributing aid, they're going to be like, oh, like who's kind of in charge around here? Who's, who are the activists? Like, who are the journalists? Like, hey, man, here, have some flour. It's great. Here, happy to help. All the while having like really high tech Israeli surveillance equipment and dragnet apparatuses throughout like all of their comms units, throughout all of their equipment as well. So, just like NGOs that are funded by the U.S. government, it's a method of intelligence collection and increased surveillance in Gaza with actual boots on the ground, interacting with the population, because American contractors can interact with the population in a way that the Israeli Defense Force can't.
Right.
Because people avoid the Israeli Defense Force because they know they're just going to get like shot in the head if they look at a guy the wrong way.
But you don't think that they'll be suspicious of these mercenaries?
Oh, they absolutely,
American mercenaries who arrive?
They absolutely will. They're already suspicious of some aid workers,
right,
from certain organizations. Of course they will be,
with good reason.
Yeah, but then again, they're the ones shilling out the aids. They have to be in contact with them.
I want to ask you now a little bit about shifts in public opinion in America, because the Pew Research Center conducted in early 2024 a poll that found that 46% of Americans aged 18 to 29 view Israel's conduct in the war as unacceptable. This is obviously part of a wider shift that we're seeing globally amongst younger audiences. Do you think there is a cultural shift happening in the US? And if so, why is that not being reflected politically?
Well, again, I brought up the Vietnam War. Like most people, the overwhelming majority of Americans were against it, but it's hard to stop this ponderous bureaucratic death machine at times. People are still under the impression that like voting is what gets it done. But also really, if we look at even regimes like South African apartheid, they were banned from the Olympics since the 60s. Basically everybody, they became a pariah state with only Britain and the US and Israel backing them at the very end. And as public opinion began to shift and shift and shift, even 5 years before it collapsed, people were like, this can never end. So we do have to keep that in mind. This is unprecedented what's happening right now. We just like accept that as a baseline. A multi-generational propaganda campaign by Israel has been absolutely shattered. And it's not a left-right thing. Within right-wing circles, at least in America, there is a shift against like the quote-unquote globalists. America first. Why are we sending foreign aid? Why are we sending military aid to Ukraine? Why are we sending military aid to Taiwan? Why are we sending military aid to Israel?
So I guess my question is then, we are seeing this shift even among Republicans, right? And I think this is what's particularly interesting for those of us on the outside, where there was a sort of perception that, although there was a bipartisan support for Israel until very recently across both Republicans and Democrats in the US, now we're sort of seeing, growing voices on both sides expressing dissent on this support for Israel, albeit in all likelihood for very different reasons. For example, a recent poll found that 52% of young Republicans aged 18 to 29 support a US arms embargo on Israel, and only 27% view Israel's government favorably. And I wonder to what extent you feel that the emergence of critical voices like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and others who become faces of this sort of right-wing critique of Israel have been part of facilitating this shift. And do you think it's going to be an enduring change? I mean, are we going to see support for Israel become, a political football? Some people just don't want to see it.
I mean, definitely, it's already happening. What's been interesting is to watch the ideological fragmentation in right wing U.S. politics, because they're always generally, even with like in the MAGA sphere, they're towing the line, being like good little soldiers who love America. But now there's a battle between what they would consider the right and the woke right that hates Israel. Like Candace Owens is somehow woke, which is an absurd claim.
Well, mainly because she's completely anti-woke.
Yeah. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, ideological fragmentation happening. I mean, it's good, I guess, that they're speaking out against Israel, but I don't think it comes from like the best place, because it also gets into like Jewish conspiracy theories, and going down that rabbit hole. Whereas I would rather just have them do a critique of capitalism.
Indeed.
Instead. So
Indeed.
It's inherently problematic, and I will never go on those platforms because I ideologically disagree with 95% of everything they say, including their take on Palestine.
Yeah. But also maybe their anti-abortion ads halfway through the program, advising you where you can find support if you'd like to not be a baby killer, which I always enjoy when I'm watching a Candace Owens program. So among the serious caveats, I do want to push you on that, because I suspect that there's some actual anti-Semitism within some of those quarters.
Oh, 100%.
Right? So the sort of traditional Christian anti-Semitism, not suggesting it's all Christians, but certainly there has been a tradition within some sort of more extreme, we might say, Christian circles of sort of blaming Jews for the death of Jesus, and sort of having a kind of disdain and dislike for Jewish people. And I wonder to what extent you think some of that is also part of what fuels the rise of critiques of Israel on the Republican right.
I mean, these legitimately anti-Semitic ideas have always existed. And this is kind of why, well, case in point is why we say like Zionism is the most anti-Semitic ideology, because, when you have members of the Knesset saying we are bombing Gaza so that they never forget that the Jews did this. And, you also have Benjamin Netanyahu coming to Congress and getting 150 standing ovations from all of our elected officials. And they're actively cracking down on not just dissent on the left, but dissent on the right. It basically empowers all of these. And we see how the undue influence that Israel has on the U.S. government, the UK government. Obviously, it feeds into all of these, conspiracy theories that have been loitering around in the right-wing Christian nationalist consciousness since the late, I don't know, for centuries, actually, if we look at the entirety of European history. So, and of course, Zionism thrives off of that, because it's like, it's no longer safe for you here. You have to come to Israel. It's the only place for you. And of course, we've all talked about this at length, but and that's kind of why I see some of the rhetoric, a lot of the rhetoric coming out of like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, to name a couple, as inherently problematic, because it does reinforce that idea and does harden Zionist ideologies against it as well.
And in the US, we've obviously, you mentioned sort of decades of Israeli propaganda early on, sort of coming to fruition, but also being sort of more countered today than they have ever. We've seen in the US something called Project 2025, which was an ultra-conservative vision which Donald Trump initially described as just an idea, but which has essentially now become policy. And many argue that Project 2025 is already now in action, from the handling of immigration and abortion to the rollback of DEI schemes. And now the Heritage Foundation, who are the same people who put out the Project 25, have come up with something called Project Esther. Now, Project Esther proposes a rebrand of all critics of Israel as, surprise, surprise, Hamas supporters. Shocking, right? Like, I'm so surprised to hear that everyone who criticizes Israel is now a Hamas supporter, which now includes my president, Macron. President Macron apparently is now a Hamas supporter. Welcome to the club. So it's a joke, for legal's sake. Now, plans for Project Esther include suppressing the Palestine solidarity movement in the US, encouraging protest crackdowns, deportations, and much more. So is Project Esther just already underway, Greg? And what is it all about from your perspective?
This is nothing new. We have seen the Israel lobby crack down, and this is just a crackdown on all this. They've implemented anti-boycott laws within many U.S. states. Their reach has penetrated into college administrations, into the corporate world, and now this is just the Christian Zionist angle of them trying to do the exact same thing. Is it going to work? Is it going to backfire? Probably. Again, we're talking about like a lot of people who supported Project 2025, and a lot of people who support on the right who loved and got a lot of their like think tank pieces, quotes, like heavy sarcastic quotes on think tank pieces from the Heritage Foundation, but now they are starting to turn on it as well. This might seem like this is a universally accepted thing, but I follow Twitter, also called X, a lot of these accounts, and yeah, there's a big push by major voices that this is not the right play. There's outrage over it. People who were big proponents of Project 2025 don't like Project Esther. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops over the next few months as people dig more into this, if this potentially gets litigated.
What's interesting has been some of the backlash from Israeli outlets like Haaretz against Project Esther, who describe it as, quote unquote, a smokescreen that uses Jewish safety as a cover for crushing free speech. Now, they're not necessarily hugely concerned with the efforts to silence pro-Palestinian voices, but they are concerned about the sidelining of the rising tide of anti-Semitism coming from the far right, and Christian nationalists in particular, who are backing the group and who claim to be doing this in the name of protecting Jewish communities. Do you think there is a risk that actually Project Esther could make Jewish communities less safe?
And I've read some of the opinion op-eds in Haaretz about it being a smokescreen to just clamp down on free speech. Yeah, that's what they've been doing since this started under the Biden administration. They have been smashing down on dissent since the beginning in the name of protecting Jewish communities. I've been pepper sprayed 5 times under the Biden administration. People have been getting detained under the Biden administration. It's just passing the proverbial football from one administration to the next. And this is the Christian Zionist iteration of this. And of course, behind all of this is they want to be the arbiters of who and what can speak and what they can say. So, this all goes into the Heritage Foundation's vision of a mass deportation scheme, expanded ICE raids. It's all part of this whole system of control, and this is just one aspect of it. They're just using every lever they can to get what they want, which is domination.
And which is looking more and more fascistic, to use the term very accurately, the confluence of private interests and political power with the goal of, minimizing population dissent. It's really shocking to be in 2025 with the history that we have here in Europe and to see the rise of these states that have ethno-nationalism at their core, and there be so little critical recognition of what that represents. I mean, the notion of a Jewish state for Jewish people is a supremacist notion. The idea that there are differential rights for different groups based on a construct of race is literally racial supremacy. And yet, for some reason, it never gets called out as such. And what's really interesting is that there are more and more Jewish dissidents speaking out on it. I mean, just in the last week, Ben & Jerry's co-founder, Ben Cohen, was arrested.
Oh, yeah, I was there.
In the Senate hearing. You were in the Senate hearing with us. So how are so many people swallowing the idea that Jewish people can be accused of anti-Semitism? Because that's essentially what's happened to Ben Cohen and so many others. It's like you stand up in the Senate and protest a genocide. Somehow now Ben Cohen is an anti-Semite?
This is all part of the multi-generational propaganda campaign, the information operations campaign that I talk about. Like, so if you criticize Israel at all, well, you're actually kind of more of the enemy because you're more dangerous because you hate yourself and you empower more Jew hatred through that. So, yeah, it's not surprising that he got slammed with that as well. And that's why organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, I forget what the corollary here is in Britain, but there are similar organizations throughout Europe and North America. That's why they're one of the biggest threats to the Zionist establishment.
And they're targeted, in fact, very directly in Project Esther. They're actually referenced by name as being one of the some of the organizations that are allegedly to be rebranded as pro-Hamas, which of course we know Jewish Elders for Peace and Jewish Voices for Peace, naturally are bedfellows with that. Let me move you on slightly to what's going on with Donald Trump in the region. So Donald Trump is unpredictable at the best of times, but turning on Israel was not on anyone's bingo card. He snubbed Israel in a few ways recently, at least if you read the papers, that's what it seems like. Let's start with the fact that Trump didn't even stop in Israel during his tour of the Middle East, which was a first for a US president visiting the region in decades. Do you think this was a deliberate choice? Surely this is a statement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always wary of what could potentially be political theater. Like, some of this reminds me of those intentional and controlled leaks from the Biden administration where, it came out. Axios News reports that President Biden calls Benjamin Netanyahu a bad effing guy. It's like, whoa, this is really going to turn things around. This is really going to change the relationship. Yeah, okay, he snubbed Israel. He made a ceasefire with the Houthis independent of Israel.
Right.
He's pursuing Iranian nuclear talks that are kind of stalling in their fifth round. I don't know. Has any political pressure been put on Israel? Is the arms shipments going to stop? Are we going to stop? While all this is happening, his administration is trying to sanction Kareem Khan of the ICC. Microsoft has deactivated his email account. He apparently has which I don't want to dismiss out of hand, but sexual misconduct allegations out of nowhere. And Israel has been pressuring his predecessor, since the Palestinian state was recognized as an observer state within the United Nations. So he's doing these performative things. I guess it's a wait and see because there hasn't been any action beyond that.
Absolutely. And in fact, the US and Saudi Arabia just signed a $142 billion arms deal on the first of Trump's diplomatic tours as part of a wider $1 trillion deal. I think many people thought that the deal was part of leverage, perhaps, to bring about an end to the US-backed Israeli assault on Gaza. Instead, we've seen an intensification since the deal's been signed, and in fact, during the signing of the deal. Why would Gulf countries agree to this deal at this time when, firstly, the optics are horrific, right? This deal being signed for so much when people are literally starving to death and being bombed to smithereens. why would they accept it when, in fact, at least in the case of some of those states, they've also publicly denounced Israel's actions in Gaza?
Speaking strictly from Trump's foreign policy initiative, yes, he is erratic, but there are through lines for what he wants. One of them is a completion. I think we could correctly interpret this as a completion of the Abraham Accords, basically the formal normalization of diplomatic and commercial ties between Israel and the Arab states. So in 2020, I think it was finally formalized. A number of Arab states were part of the Accords, and they have now official relations with Israel, Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco. I mean, Jordan's been normalized before that with Israel, for quite a while. And he wants to expand that throughout the region. And of course, Saudi government and the Gulf states want normalization with Israel. They wouldn't mind if Gaza was cleared out and put under a Arab coalition or administration, because they want access to the ports and a rail system through the IMET corridor, the India or the Mumbai, through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, into the ports of Haifa and Escalation into Europe, which is kind of seen as America's counter to China's global infrastructure plan as the Belt and Road Initiative. And they already have unofficial commercial intelligence sharing normalization with Israel. Like, Israel's massive insurance policy in the region is they give spy tech and espionage equipment to all of these Arab monarchical dynastic governments to quash dissent within their own countries. They already have this massive unofficial normalization insurance network with all these countries, because there's nothing more than that these monarchies fear than an Arab Spring 2.0. And, they've been watching the unfolding. And I'm not saying there isn't, every country's different, and I'm not saying there isn't massive unrest and dissatisfaction throughout like North Africa and West Asia about what's happening in Palestine, but nothing substantive has happened. There have been no checks placed on it, so they think they can act with even more impunity now, that they can get even closer to normalization with Israel, which they want, because they are comprador states that want to make more and more money. And the U.S. wants to use the Gulf states as a hedge against China, and they in their AI war against China as well. So, this is a fundamental part of Trump's foreign policy plan, to complete the Abraham Accords. And of course, don't want to get into Syria. That's another polarizing issue. But it looks like there's going to be normalization there if al-Shara, the president there, survives. Also, Lebanon is also pushing towards, with President Aoun, pushing towards normalization there, and the disenfranchisement and dissolution of Hezbollah. And they kind of want to use that as a plan to expand what's happening in Gaza and the redevelopment of Gaza into Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and any other place of resistance to U.S. foreign policy within the region.
It's almost as if there's a redrawing of the map of the Middle East that's been planned and prepared and is now being executed. But of course, I wouldn't want to speculate that there'd been any behind the scenes planning on that one. But with the war in Gaza, the blockade in Yemen, rising tensions between Iran and Israel, obviously we saw just this morning, in fact, US intelligence that Israel is allegedly preparing to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. Based on your experience and analysis, how close are we to an escalation and what, in fact, could de-escalate this, if it is actually escalating?
So, it's interesting that it came through CNN. CNN is a mechanism for controlled leaks from the U.S. intelligence community. So what this generally signals, again, informed supposition, that certain people within the apparatus didn't want an Israeli strike. So one of the reasons you would leak something is in order to create a public backlash, in order to forestall it. Because the U.S. at this time doesn't want Israel striking Iranian targets, mostly because it wouldn't accomplish anything and it could drag the United States into a direct confrontation. So basically why this is interpreted by a lot of people, and I was up late talking to some folks last night about this, is Israel doesn't even have the capacity to really do bombing sorties into Iran. They have to get refueled on the way back over Iraqi airspace, and they don't have strato tankers like we do. They would have to use our own planes for that. And Iranian hard sites, nuclear hard sites, weren't put underground and protected because they feared Israeli attacks. Because the Israeli Air Force and military doesn't have the capacity to take out their infrastructure with the ordnance they have available. So part of Trump's negotiating strategy for the Iranian nuclear deal was to stage half the B-2 bomber fleet, stealth bombers, out of Diego Garcia Air Base. It was this tiny little air base on an island in the Indian Ocean, and it's within striking distance of Iran. So the B-1 bombers, excuse me, have the capacity to carry the 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrators, which people, I guess, colloquially call MOABs, mother of all bombs, but that's not what they're. Yeah. So they were developed originally in the Afghan war to collapse the Taliban tunnels in Tora Bora. So that's what they're thinking that they could hit nuclear hard sites with in Iran. Of course, Israel doesn't have that capacity. They would have to draw us in to do that. And it seems that Trump really does want this nuclear deal. He is an erratic player, but there are certain things throughout his entire career he has been fixated upon. And that is a Nobel Peace Prize.
The Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. He is so pissed that Obama got one. And because Trump was one of the original birther conspiracy theorists that really spread like he wasn't even born in America.
Right.
And that exacerbates his ego about it. That irks him that Obama got it basically for nothing while also being a neoliberal warlord at the time. But he has said it multiple times. Even Scott Bessent, Elise Stefanik, like really senior members of his cabinet have also repeated this on international press that like he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He would probably get one for securing a ceasefire with Russia and Ukraine. That doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So it definitely does seem like he's one of his motivations for pushing through an Iranian nuclear deal, which looks increasingly like Obama's JCPOA,
right,
which he trashed when he came into office.
Let's not tell anyone that it's basically the Obama Iran.
Yeah, so he wants that. And honestly, he's such an irrational actor. Could just take one of his aides to be like, "Hey, Mr. President, this looks like Obama's legacy plan,"
and it'll get thrown out.
just get thrown out.
Well, let's make sure Trump doesn't watch this then, huh?
Yeah, oh no, sorry, we're not Fox News,
right? Well, you never know. I mean, so on that subject, look, Danielle Weiss was nominated for it, the so-called mother of all settlers.
Frau Genocide.
Frau Genocide, who has now had sanctions placed on her by the UK at last. But certainly, if she can be nominated, I think Trump is certainly in with a winning chance. Unfortunately, we are almost done with our conversation, Greg. But before we go, I want to ask you a little bit about censorship and your experience of censorship online. We're all experiencing it, obviously, on platforms like Meta and also on YouTube. What has been your own experience when it comes to this department? Specifically with regards to your podcast and your speaking and your reach, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So with the Colonial Outcast podcast, we're pretty much demonetized on YouTube. We grew rapidly and then kind of stopped. Our videos get basically no exposure unless you have notifications turned on. It doesn't like really show up on your For You page or in your feed. Interestingly, that doesn't exist on like audio platforms. Like engagement's still normal on like Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, but any of these video platforms, including social media platforms, heavily censored. So Twitter, we also we stream episodes to Instagram as well. They just really not showing up on certain Meta-related platforms and Google-related platforms.
And what would you say to, young people and maybe even not so young people who are increasingly feeling, in despair and cynical and, unclear on what they should be doing at this time? People have been marching, they've been on these platforms speaking out, they're now censored in much the same way that you are. things are only getting worse. People in Gaza have not had any food deliveries in over 11 weeks now. They're being bombed. There are now mercenaries added to their already horrific situation. What would you say to people who just say, look, I feel like we've tried. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm just feeling in deep despair with regards to what we should be doing and whether anything is actually effective.
What I would say is just keep doing what you're doing. It is working, not as fast as anybody would want it. But again, I'm just going to reference the Vietnam backlash, which was even more hardcore than anything we're doing. And it took such a long time to stop the imperial death machine. That being said, these feelings about despair, depression, like that just comes from the war state, the nation state, and the isolation of capitalism. So, which kind of breeds nihilism, ennui, depression. So you're not alone in that, and just keep on doing what you're doing. So
keep on doing what you're doing, and a little reminder on my t-shirt out here: our day will come.
Yeah, that's generally how things work out. So
Greg Stoker, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for joining us also. I hope today's conversation offered not just answers, but the kinds of questions that linger, challenging you to see the world with fresh eyes. At the T, we are here to spotlight voices that challenge the status quo and bring clarity to the chaos. If that matters to you too, help us keep going. Share this episode, hit subscribe now, and join our community on Patreon. Until next time, stay engaged, stay questioning, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching The Tea. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if you've made it this far, why not keep going and check out this episode?